Welcome back to the Sweat Elite podcast. It's Matt here, the founder at Sweat Elite and co-host of the Sweat Elite podcast. Thanks for tuning into this episode. If you're listening to this on Spotify or an Apple Podcast or on your preferred podcast player, there is a full video interview over on the YouTube channel as well, so do go and check that out. This episode of the Sweat Elite podcast, or the Hang With series, is with Erik Floberg, who is a filmmaker, a 238 marathoner, a father of 4, and in my opinion has one of the best YouTube channels in the world in terms of individual runner YouTube channels. Erik documented his journey to the Boston Marathon, where ultimately he ran 238. I was lucky enough to run side by side with Erik for the first 24-ish miles of the race, and he has put out a couple of awesome videos on his YouTube channel all about the Boston Marathon experience since we raced it a couple of weeks back. In this conversation, we speak all about Erik's training, about how he discovered running, about how he discovered filmmaking, and plenty of the challenges that go into filmmaking, plenty of the rewarding moments that come as a result of filmmaking as well. And I really enjoyed this conversation with Erik as he dived deep into his life and his activities in the filmmaking and running space. This conversation is another episode of Hang With, which means the sponsor of the Hang With series is Precision Fuel and Hydration, one of Sweat Elite's key brand partners that we've been working with for a little bit over 18 months now. My favorite products from Precision Fuel and Hydration include the gels, the 30-gram carb gels. If you're watching the video, you can actually see the product. There is 100 milligrams of caffeine in these as well, which is basically the same as a regular coffee. I really like the carb chews as well. Perfect to have about 30 to 60 minutes before a workout or before a race. There's also, as I said, 30 grams of carbs in these, but they sit very well in the stomach. I also really like the 90-gram carb gel packets as well. Really convenient for long runs. It's basically just like having 3 gels in one packet and a screw top lid. So no mucking around with pulling off packet lids and plastic and so forth. Just a super simple container, a little bit more cost effective as well, and perfect to take on long runs. So a huge thank you to Precision Fuel and Hydration for sponsoring the Hang With series and of course this episode as well. If you'd like to try Precision Fuel and Hydration products, you can head over to their website and score 15% off with the code SWEATELITE at checkout. That's about enough from me in this intro. I hope that you enjoyed this conversation shot at Erik Floberg's studio in Chicago that took place just a couple of days ago now. Erik Floberg, welcome to the Sweat Elite podcast. I'm stoked to do this in your studio. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, of course, man. It's super exciting to have this chat, especially just, a week removed from what just happened.
I know. So Boston Marathon was 8 days ago. We'll get into all that fun stuff. I guess I wanted to open up, many people listening probably would be familiar with you. People that are really clued into the really high-end elite space may not be clued in, especially if they're not on YouTube. So how would you describe to someone, let's say you're going into a marathon and someone's not familiar with you and they ask, what do you do? And how would you describe the way that you broadcast your journey of running?
It's getting really confusing. Well, I keep having this conversation with people on if someone approaches me and says, hey man, I love your work, I have to awkwardly be like, what, which one? Is it the creative stuff or is it the running stuff? And I have 2 YouTube channels. So I guess to answer your question, I would say I'm a photographer and filmmaker, career-wise, but running has become a new branch of my entrepreneurial endeavors, which is super weird. And that's usually candidly how I talk about it. I'm like, it's just really strange, like what I do. It's an intersection that a lot of people don't experience, where I think, a lot of people would be like, oh, I'm sure you struggle as a photographer and filmmaker, starving artists, that whole mentality. And then to give them a sucker punch and be like, yeah, I'm also an athlete and a runner. They're like, you can't make any money.
Yeah.
The short is just photographer, filmmaker, creative, YouTuber. And I'm starting to be like, that even gets too confusing. I almost feel like I just need to be like, I'm an artist.
Yeah. That's probably the easiest way to put it. Well, perfect segue into asking you. And to be honest, I've had a few brief discussions with you about this, but I'd like to hear the full story about how did you discover running in the first place?
Yeah, I started with running as an 11-year-old, 6th grade. Mile was, I think, my first real introduction to racing or trying to go after a time or something. And it was at that point in our phys ed class that everyone had to do the mile. And so I found out quickly that I was the fastest in the grade. And I was like, oh, well, that's fun. And I think I had run, a 7-minute mile or something. And so the next time we did it, I'm like, they put your name up on the wall. So I'm like, I have to do that again. I have to get my name up there, make sure everyone knows. So at that point, I think that's almost like that almost feels like that was the first initial thing that kind of, I don't know, I still feel that way, a bit. And so into junior high, we had a really awesome district where we did track and field by 7th grade. So I was running cross country in the fall and track in the spring. And I was the athlete kid. Like I was doing every sport. I tried every sport. I've done every sport. And I felt like I had the natural inclination towards running because of, those first moments of being the fastest in the mile in the grade, whatever. In cross country, I was able to win district, and our high school was in the state of Illinois, always top 3 in cross country in the whole state. And they're like a powerhouse. Funny enough, when I was a freshman, Steve Finley, who's on the marketing team with Bandit, was a senior, and he won state, and that was like a core memory for me. So yeah, I just, was coming in first place in a lot of meets, and I just hated that pressure. So I stopped doing it through high school and focused more on other sports. I did football and wrestling, kind of hated those, and stuck with gymnastics for 4 years, which is strange. But yeah, it was just off and on. Like I would run every once in a while and just never really did it. And then I ran 10 miles one time randomly in the summer of 2010. And I was like, okay, that was really long and difficult. But that kind of, I think from that summer, I was like, as a bucket list thing, I want to run a marathon one day.
Okay. So from that 10-mile run, bridge the gap for me into entering marathons.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Because then it was another 7 years until I actually ran my first marathon. So I think from time to time I would think about that being the end goal, but I got married in 2013. We had kids right away. So it was just like life, graduate, married, kids, boom. And at that point, our oldest was 3 years old. And it's quarter life crisis kind of moment, I think, where like I've always wanted to do that. So I want to see what my options are. Went in with Special Olympics. And so had no idea what I was doing. Don't know why I chose the marathon distance. Like didn't even try to run 5Ks, 10Ks, nothing. It was just an all or nothing kind of thing. Since it was the bucket list thing, I had already been growing my business, liked doing really hard things, liked really hard challenges. This was right around the point where I had just transitioned out of teaching full-time and building my business. Because 2013 to 2016, I was in a classroom as a public school teacher. And so when I stopped that in 2016, I all of a sudden had some open time. I guess that's why I started to think about the idea of running a marathon. So yeah, just jumped in, thought of that summer where I ran that, and I was like, I could do that. Like I could do that times 2.5, right? Like probably.
How can it be?
Yeah, I had no clue. Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. I mean, now, you're getting down to the pointy end and you're bordering what most would call sub-elite category, right? Like, and especially given what Coach Jeff mentioned at the end of one of your last videos, like you're staring down the pipeline of running on the 230 probably in the next 6 to 12 months, which is super exciting. Let's go back to 2017. What were the first goals? Because I think this journey is something that people find inspiring from people starting at, 3.5, 4 hours plus. I don't actually remember exactly where you started. Yeah. I have a vague memory of what it might be, but I'd like you to fill in that story for me.
Yeah. Well, I made a whole video about it that just got a ton of views on YouTube because I think for that same reason, people saw they had the same kind of aspirational goals. I ran 3:50, my first marathon. And the goal, of course, at the beginning of it was to qualify for Boston because I heard that if at that point in my age group, it was 3:05 to qualify for Boston. So I was like, I can do that. I can run 6:57 or 7 flat a mile for a whole marathon. I'm in the training. I remember there's not much footage I have from back then, but I remember making one specific vlog where I thought I was Casey Neistat, like every video creator thought they were. And I was like, 3 mile run, 6:26 pace was pretty good, And I'm like doing one of those humble flexes, and looking back on it, it's like, man, you're just such a moron. Like that means absolutely nothing. And I was probably running that all out, and so I'm thinking, okay, yeah, 30-second buffer. Like I could do that for a whole marathon, right? I have other people gassing me up during that. And so I went through half in 1:35 that first marathon.
Wow.
Yeah. Okay. So, I was like,
you were confident.
I'm going to go for it. And that's even still off pace by that point. Yeah. I should have gone through, 1:32:30. And I had to hit the bathroom at 14, and I got out and had just the worst stitch of my life and just was a hobble to the end, like walking more than running, and ended with the 350. So the next year, signed up again, but completely forgot I was shooting a wedding the day before. So I was on my feet for 10 hours the day before. Since I knew that was the case going in, I barely trained for it, maybe got up to 20, 25 miles a week, 359. So got it handed to me the first 2 attempts. But that second one really pissed me off. I was like,
I'm better than this.
I'm way better than this. I know I am. I knew at least at that point, if I'm going through the half in 135 to 145, I should not be closing the second half this slow. I have to figure something out. And so that's when I partnered up with a friend who knew at least a little bit more about marathoning the next year. And we got down to 310 that year.
Wow.
Yeah.
At what point, I should have already checked this, but I'd love for you to tell the story because this is part of what I wanted to share with people. At what point in that few years, I assume it was, did you think, I'm going to broadcast this journey because I think it will be interesting and inspiring to people?
Yeah, so I was building my first YouTube channel in that time. So I had explosive growth on my photo and filmmaking channel from 2018 through COVID, going from virtually nothing. It's funny because some of the first videos I made were like for my junior high students, and they're just the cringiest, funniest, stupidest things. But they were like my first subscribers, like 500 subscribers. And I was like, oh, that's not nothing. So I started slowly, and it just, by 2021, it was over 100,000 subscribers. And in the midst of that, I was trying to integrate some videos here and there about my running, and there's just zero connection. Like I made one, I remember during COVID, it was a Seth James Damore like virtual half marathon challenge. And I ran it in 134, and I put it on the channel, and it was like one of the worst performing videos ever. I'm like, this just doesn't make sense. Like, of course, this audience doesn't want to watch this. So I think it was right around that time where I'm like, what if I just make a second channel and just for fun? It's what I love watching on YouTube. I love watching Seth Kofuzi, Ben Parks, the running channel. And so, obviously with a filmmaking background, I'm like, well, because in 2019, we actually set out to make a documentary about my attempt that year. And it's all unedited. Like we shot a lot of the training in 2019. We shot the entire race, everything. And I might make the video now.
Yeah, you got to bring that back.
Yeah.
That would be cool. Because that's the year you ran 310?
310.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which I was going for a sub 3 that year, but I ran 310. But yeah, it's super cool to know that we have that footage. And I think that's what kind of birthed in 2020. I'm like, I don't know, just for fun, kind of because we were locked inside. I'm like, I don't really have anything to make photo video wise. So might as well just start documenting my running. Made, 6 to 8 videos that year in that training block. And same kind of deal, like got to 500, it was like 250 subscribers. And I'm like, whatever. I have to focus on my work. We have 3 children, I need to, and so it just kind of sat and went dormant for a long time. And as I progressed more and more the next few years, we picked it back up when I raced Chicago in 2022. If I got 3 years right. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
And so I was like, I knew going into that fall, at the very least, I had hired my first hire. And I was like, we got to just make a race video, put it on the channel, and then just see what it does. Cause I know these race videos do really well. I know YouTube well. And so we did, and then it got a ton of views, and I'm like, huh. Yeah. And I think at that point it was, getting close to 1,000 subscribers. And I was like, maybe we should do a whole series in the spring when I go for 250.
So yeah, interesting. So you already touched on who sort of inspired you to really work the channel of running, right? You mentioned Kofuzi, Ben Parks. Was there anyone else in that space that really you were looking at going, I want to do something similar?
Well, Casey Neistat was
of course, yeah.
the huge one, constantly. I think that was what I was frustrated with my main channel. I was like, Casey seamlessly works running into his stuff. Why can't I do that? And it's a completely different thing. Like Casey built his whole brand off of his lifestyle and who he is. So it makes perfect sense that he's making videos that integrate his work life, his family life, his running life, all those things in a very unhealthy manner, I might add, that he admits now, and nearly ruined his marriage, 2.5 years of daily vlogs. And so, yeah, it was weird that we all kind of aspired to be that guy. And yet that was the most unsustainable thing you could ever imagine. So for me to compartmentalize the two was really helpful for myself. And I forgot what the original question was.
Who else in that space
who
was?
else?
Were you looking at really learning from and going, I want to do things in that realm?
I think, honestly, I don't do a good job of expanding my palette when it comes to niches. I find a few people and then I kind of lock into it and then don't really look outside of it. And so I was pretty obsessive with watching Seth and Kofuzi because they were also going daily for a while. They also don't do that anymore. You know, there's clearly a reason. It's just not sustainable. But some of like Kofuzi's Chicago marathon videos are some of the most nostalgic videos on the internet for me because I ran those races. And even in the 2019 video, I'm in his video quite a bit. And he didn't know who I was at that point. And I like tapped him on the shoulder in that race and was like, love, you know? So I think I always looked at their race videos and they shoot in a way that's very different than the way I shoot, coming from a traditional cinematographer filmmaking background. And I just looked at it and I'm like, always in the back of my mind, I'm like, I could totally approach this in a completely different way. And I know, I mean, the phrase I have on my main channel is lean into what makes you different. And that's what separates you from the crowd. So I'm like, I know the avenue. I see it. It's just a matter of putting in the work and time to do it that way. And I'm pretty sure it will be successful. And so we went for it.
Yeah, nice. Sharing the journey, it's something that some people struggle with due to X, Y, Z reasons. It's something people love and they plow through it and ignore the haters, ignore the noise, whatnot. I'm keen to hear more about the challenges and the things that you find most, I guess, rewarding about sharing your own journey, which has not only inspired people that are trying to run times you have, it's inspiring people like me to be like, oh, he can storytell this in a way that I've never really seen done before.
Yeah.
And so I'm going off topic a little bit. It's more like, I'd like to know what are the challenges in doing it?
Yeah.
And if there's anything that's really difficult, maybe nothing. And then what are the things that you find super rewarding?
Well, before I answer, let me tangent too that you said XYZ, and I love all of your different Australian little nuances whenever we talk. I just had to mention that.
You've pointed that a few times.
You're like, yeah, and that I'm keen to. I love doing impersonations of other people, so I'm working on yours right now.
Nice.
And but yeah, I think when it comes down to putting things online, you have to have a purpose for it. A why, a foundational why. There's a very popular TED Talk from Simon Sinek about your why that I implore anyone making online videos to look into and figure out what the purpose is, because I do think that so many people who are making things, especially in the short form realm, are chasing superficial bait. And something I talk about regularly in my creative career is the sustainability of it. It's so often the case that so many successful people that find success online burn out so quickly because they're chasing a superficial goal, because they're chasing the next viral video, whatever the algorithm's going to give them. And if you're in it for a long time, you know that can be an empty pursuit because of the emotional baggage that it brings whenever your video is a 10 out of 10. If YouTube has that horrible ranking system of your last 10 videos, how does this one perform? And so if you're constantly in that lower ranking, you start losing all motivation. If that is your purpose and what you're, and so rooting yourself in things that mean so much more than that system, and building your business in a way that doesn't rely on you having to do a top 5 performance every single video, things, not promising sponsors or these different entities, it's going to perform this well, it's going to do this thing, then it sets you up to be able to serve the purpose of that why. And so for me, when it comes to documenting my own running journey, I look at everything through a lens of legacy, being the dad that I am. Like I'm a big family man and care so much about the legacy I leave to my kids and what that means. And so I actually did a short film on my mom this past fall she started a YouTube channel. She's got like 5,000 subscribers now. She does arts and crafts. And it was so cool to interview her and her come to that same conclusion, or she's like, I'm making this stuff so that my grandkids can hear my voice and watch these videos and still have a part of me once I'm gone, you know? And so for me, it's really just whether it's narcissistic or that it's self-indulgent. Like I want to have these videos for when I'm old and gray. Like I want to be able to look back at these and really relish in the nostalgia of how special it was to race marathons and involve my friends and family. And so when I feel like when that's the core, so much more passion comes out of it and authenticity in a way that's wholly different than chasing it for the views, if that makes sense.
Yeah, makes complete sense.
Yeah. So I don't know. I start to get really passionate on these topics and go deep on it because I find a lot of purpose and meaning behind. I mean, it's the filmmaker in me, right? It's if things aren't emotionally driven or have some sort of foundation rooted in emotion, I'm not super interested in making them, honestly. Like anytime there's an opportunity to do something clickbait, it's why you really never see anything that's like a shoe review or anything that's super keyword heavy on my channel, because while that is totally cool for other people and they enjoy doing that, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with doing that, it would not serve a purpose for me. Like I don't find any fulfillment in making something like that. And my audience could read right through that as well. Like if I made something like that, they'd be like, what is going on here? Like you're normally the one that's talking about how you crapped your pants and how you're like getting really emotional about your kids, you know, like it's completely different. So yeah.
Yeah. Nice. If there's any challenges involved, it'd be really cool to hear. If you want to skip over that, the next question I would have is what goes into the planning of your videos?
Yeah. I mean, challenges in regard to, I missed that part of the question.
I think a lot of people might look at YouTube channels and go, it doesn't seem that hard.
Sure.
And I think you and I can both push back on that.
For sure.
So what would be your pushback on some of the things that might pop up?
There is a huge emotional component to putting yourself out there online in dealing with people in the comments and haters. And, you know, people have different ways of dealing with it and how they can handle that. For me, although it might not look it, I take a lot of those comments really personally. And I think all of us do. If we're pouring our heart and soul into making this stuff and someone comes back with something that, you know, is a gut check and hurts us emotionally, it hurts, you know, like to know and feel that a real human is saying that thing about you that you are protecting so much and care so much about, it hurts. And so what I've come to realize throughout the years is a lot of the time those people like deserve being put in their place, deserve the clap back, you know, and I've done that. But the reality is when I do that, I feel worse than doing the opposite. And so I've committed to myself that if those comments arise, I either clown on myself with them or I'll just send them like nothing but love to you, like, or not respond and just let that be. Because for me, that allows myself to move on and to just let it go. And that allows me to just actually forget about it. And so just because so often it's people that are just really, really hurting and really insecure about their own life and maybe their own athletics or whatever. And so for me, when I look at it through that perspective and dunking on someone in that state, I'm like, oh, I don't have an interest in that, you know? So, and, you know, I come from my teaching background is in special education too. So like I have a disposition to people who have, you know, emotional disabilities or that kind of stuff as well. And so I'm always thinking like that could be going on and all those nuances. And so I'm constantly trying to, I'm not saying I don't struggle with it. Like I still have that inclination to clap back a lot. But yeah, it's been really freeing to like have that. And so that's that part of that. But on the other side, just someone challenged me recently because there was one video I made and there was a comment like that. And it was the only comment I responded to. I responded with that love, like, hey man, still love you. Like, I hope you keep watching. And that's all I said. But I responded to none of the other comments on the video. And that kind of tore me up that someone recognized like, man, all these people are giving you love and you just responded to the hater with love. And I was like, yeah, you have to recognize too, there's so many people in your corner. And that's just an unbelievable majority, 99.8% who are in your corner and cheering you on. And so focusing on that is really awesome too, because so many people see themselves in your story, whatever it is. Just seeing a progression, I have so many people come to me, man, I'm a dad of this many kids, and like, you're just firing me up, and like, this is making me a better dad and a husband and these things. And to me, ultimately, that's what I care about most. Like seeing people, sure, marathon times are great, but like I kind of zoom out and go, okay, what do I want my gravestone to say? Like, I want my kids to say, yeah, he was a loving father. You know, I want my wife to say, yeah, he was a loving husband. Not that he ran a sub 2:30 marathon, you know? And so if people are kind of picking up on those things in the process, the metaphors of running and life are just so beautiful as they kind of intersect with each other, you know?
Just a quick update from Sweat Elite, guys, before we get back to the conversation with Eric Floberg. Sweat Elite will be holding a training camp this coming July in Boulder, Colorado, between the 19th and the 22nd of July. You're invited to join us, but we're taking a maximum of 10 people, and it's been on sale for a couple of days now. So you can head over to sweatelite.co/Boulder Training Camp to learn more. It includes absolutely everything: food, accommodation, education, training sessions, and so much more in one of the best locations in the world to train. So do go and check that out if you're interested. Sweat Elite also has a new shareholders club where you can access even more content than ever before. You access a private podcast feed and so many articles on the Sweat Elite website. It's well over 400, all about elite distance running training. So if you'd like to join us over there, it's only $10 a month or $99 a year, and we'd really appreciate your support. Thanks for tuning in, guys, and do check out the training camp and the shareholders club if you're interested.
Great answer.
Yeah.
We're both Tim Ferriss podcast listeners, and I once heard him say, if you're putting out content and less than 10% of the internet hates it, you're doing pretty well. And I think we've spoken before off air, obviously, about, you know, the occasional hater here and there. And it's really easy to focus on that person. But then when you do zoom out, it's like, hang on, it's 99% plus support. Yeah. What am I doing?
Yeah.
Yeah. Planning your videos. I mean, some people would probably be curious, especially if they're interested in starting a channel like yours. Like, how do you plan them? Is there much planning? Is it off the cuff? There's probably a bit of both. I can tell there's sort of a bit of both. But what does go behind the scenes into making a video on your channel?
Yeah. So now, I mean, when I started really putting more time and energy into it, I had a different employee. His name is Shua. He has moved on to his own stuff now, has his own YouTube channel that has been blowing up for him, which is super awesome. So he helped me with all of my Carmel series in 2022, spring of 22, and then into about half of my Chicago series in the fall of 22. A lot of that stuff then was very off the cuff. This is what's happening this week. This is what we can document. Let's just figure out what works week to week. Sometimes that's just sitting down, and because we didn't have enough time to film something, and I do a 10-minute video where I'm just sitting down and talking about what was challenging for me that week, which is super interesting because the running world is interested in videos like that. And the creative world is not interested in videos like that. And then here and there, as long as I'm keeping up with, you know, videos where I'm documenting my workouts, a lot of those were, because my employee now, Cyrus, has the athletic background. And so it feels functionally very different than it was prior. A lot of the stuff prior was me filming myself in workouts with a GoPro. And so the first 2 series was a lot of that, where I was bringing it along. And now that I'm progressing into faster times, I find myself wanting to carry the camera a whole lot less because of how much harder the training is. And so, yeah, while a lot of that was off the cuff, there were times where we would do, you know, a dedicated video. Like if we were doing a hype video before a race, we would sit down and plan it. And, you know, there's websites like Shot Deck where it's like filmmakers use it a lot. You pull frames from movies and you use inspirational stills from movies or TV shows, and you kind of emulate what that looks like for the video you want to make. And so now moving into what we're doing, Cyrus and I do a good bit of that whenever we're making an intentional video. But this whole Boston block, we pretty much fell into a rhythm of let's record every Wednesday workout at the very least, and then a long run if it has speed in it. And then everything on the periphery is kind of just on my iPhone, and easy runs are kind of here. We can pause for the siren if you want.
It's always going to happen.
Yeah, Chicago. we just roll through it on our podcast. We're like, whatever.
Yeah, I wouldn't have minded, honestly. I would have just gone with it and just been like, yeah, we are in Chicago.
Yeah. But yeah, so we fell into that rhythm and found that a lot of people were really interested in the workout, because there's only so much you can talk about when you're on an easy run. You know, it's just kind of the same thing, unless I'm talking about what easy miles mean inside of a training block. And so we've come to realize that 2 videos a block where I break down the entire week, those do so well. When I break down a 60 or 70 mile week and I document every single day with the same intentionality, and we build like a 30-minute video, those always crush with views. I mean, it feels like everything we put out there is just on fire, which is a very good problem to have. But yeah, it's really easy to, within an intense training block, to just show up and document a workout and then use our filmmaking skills to make it polished and interesting and tell some sort of story in that. So yeah, a lot of it's off the cuff, but we plan on this summer, when I'm not like in a formal training block, we're going to make a lot of really cool like short films that are running related. So I'm really interested to see how that resonates with the crowd, because it's going to be a whole new, like I haven't seen it on running YouTube yet, where it's more of this emotional stuff. It's more of the backstory, and it might even be fictional sometimes, you know? And so it's going to cross into the creative realm that in a way that I haven't before, but in a way that's going to relate to the runners. And I think people will really like it. So,
wow, I'm excited to see that. I mean, part of the reason why I'm here today is obviously watched your stuff from probably almost a year ago, and then started watching more and more, and was like, there's very few people that know how to tell a story like you do relating to running, which is hard to do. You kind of already pointed at the fact that in a running week, there's only so much interesting that can happen unless you engineer stuff, which people don't tend to like so much if you're generally doing, you know, a weekly recap. But no, that's awesome. Thanks for sharing. A couple more things I wanted to ask you about. The first one is something that a lot of people have spoken to me about, that they find fascinating about your own progression, and it's that you have 4 children and you're married, obviously, and the 4 children are all still quite young. And I met 3 people in Boston that asked me what I was doing in the race. I said, I'm pacing you, and all 3 along, you know, in the next few minutes mentioned it's so impressive that he's able to do this, produce the videos, run at the level, and have a family of, you know, 4 children. So any insight into how you manage that, I think people would find interesting.
Well, when it pertains to the running channel specifically, there's no way I could produce at the frequency and quality that I do without an employee. Like Cyrus in this training block has just been electric. Like he's so talented. He's young, so young himself. He's 20 years old, and it's so cool to see. He came up to me at my friend's movie premiere that we were both at. He flew up from Florida to come to Chicago to see it, and that's where we met. And he's like, I follow your creative YouTube channel. I follow your running channel. Can we go on a run together? And I was like, oh, no one's asked me that. We should, okay, let's do it. So that's how I met him. But he's learned from me, which is so strange that he's learned the creative side of his job from me online. So I've already trained him without knowing him, and he already knows my voice in a way that so many other people don't, because they haven't watched my stuff. And so the fact that he regularly watched both channels and came into this position being like, I know how he edits, I know what the emotional component he adds, I know the music choices he likes, all these things. That's what makes it possible with the frequency of a weekly video when we're in a training block, functionally. Outside of that, this is not a question that's foreign to me. Before I even started the running channel, this is the most common question I would get when I was in the creative realm. And back then, I didn't have an employee, and every time I made a YouTube video, I had an unhealthy habit of pretty much staying up till 3 to 5 a.m. and just cranking out the video and then sleeping for 3 hours and just dealing with it the next day.
Isn't that Casey Neistat style?
It is. And so but it wasn't to the same frequency. I wasn't doing that every night. I was doing that maybe once a week. But that didn't allow me to train or progress in running, because I just wasn't getting the rest. I didn't know this, like the severity of what that meant rest-wise. But doing that afforded me the opportunity to build the career I have now. And I think Casey might say the same thing, where he's like, he can do what he does now and just kind of sit and hang and make stuff when he wants. I'm kind of in that realm with my job now. And I feel like I had the insight back then to go, I know what YouTube is. I know what I'm building. And if I don't stay up till 3 a.m., this project's not going to get done. It's going to get lost in the background. I won't post it for another week. And so I would charge through the night and do it. And so there was sacrifices like that that helped me build what I build. And in that time, I would sacrifice sleep. And I've seen it where people talk about personal life, professional life, and sleeping. Like this, you can only have 2 of the 3. Like, I don't know if you've ever seen that diagram. And for me, it was sleep. I would just let that go. But at the same time, like, we're in a creative studio with a lot of other people, and I would have friends help me, and we would scratch each other's backs and all the things that we did. And I also just can't escape this conversation without talking about how incredible my wife is. Like, she's just unbelievable.
I figured.
She is, out of all of our friends in our friend group, they just look at her and they're like, she's the shining example of what a mother is, you know? And so I mean, and I fully agree with them. I'm in awe of her and the patience that she has. And she works just as hard as I do, and it goes unnoticed. And I'm trying to be better about broadcasting that as well, whether she wants me to or not. She probably doesn't want me to. But she homeschools them now. And we made that decision this year to start doing that, just for a multitude of different reasons. But she does so happily, and she wants to be spending that time with them. And now that I have an employee in the structure and the system that I do, I am actually able to get sleep, and I am able to have at least regularity on the run channel. Right now, my main channel has just been kind of dormant for a while. We have plans to get it going again, but my career is always just ebbs and flows of intensity in one regard. At one point, this stream of income is getting more intensity now, and then I back off of it, and then I press on the gas over here. And I love that because it gives me options to be passionate about different things at different times, and I'm not wholly reliant on one thing at one time. And so it's just really cool diversification of income and things to do now. And I honestly don't feel any pressure in any direction and that gives me so much opportunity to, like, if we look at the running space, I'm not looking at this contract that's sitting in my email or like, oh, I have to take that. I don't have to. I've, said no to a lot of stuff for that reason. Cause I'm like, it doesn't fall in line with what I do. I have all these other things and streams of income that are supporting me and my family now. I'm going to do it my own way. And a lot of brands have actually been like, you know what? We're going to allow you to do it your way because of that, which is pretty powerful. I don't know. Yeah.
It's rare too. Like, a lot of brands with sponsorship deals want it their way.
Yeah.
And I've not spoken to you in detail about this, but I'd love to probably off air about how that works. But that's interesting because I've definitely noticed that in your videos. I'm noticing brands, but then I'm curious to learn, but we'll talk about that later.
Yeah.
You mentioned intensity. Let's talk about Boston. So, what a ride. 8 days ago, personal best, 2:38, on a day that probably less than 5% of people that took the race seriously ran PRs.
Yeah.
6 months earlier, you ran your PR in Chicago in a perfect weather day, and you improved upon that. And Coach Jeff Cunningham was very clear afterwards that you're probably in, 2:33, 2:32, 2:34, somewhere around that shape on a similar day to, say, Chicago last year, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's talk about it. Boston.
I walk away from that race and it's a pinch me moment. Like, hearing your story as well, like, I didn't understand your progression until, like, we met each other and then heard it. And now I'm looking at you and I'm like, oh my goodness, am I heading in this direction? Like, I don't know. And I keep saying this, but now it's actually becoming real where I'm like, I don't know what my ceiling is. I keep saying, I'm going to keep discovering what it is. I'm going to keep going into the unknown. I don't know. And so I just keep progressing, and let's keep going for the ride. And if that ends up plateauing at a 2:30 marathon, I don't know. If that is, I'm still going to run marathons. I'm still going to love doing it. I'm going to want to be competitive. I'm going to want to be Ken Rideout, the age of 52, like winning that age championship. But yeah, Boston was, I don't know, it was otherworldly. Like, and you said it as well. This course, this energy is just like nothing else. Comparable to New York, comparable to Chicago in ways as far as energy, but also just not even close to the same. And the combination of energy and difficulty is what makes it so special, I think, because you get to the hills, you get to that part of the race and everything beyond, and it's the heaviest crowds you've ever seen in a marathon race, and people dragging you through some of those dark moments, the darkest moments, is just, yeah, it's hard to explain. And yeah, I fell off pace on the hills and knew that the sub 235 was, not really possible at that point, but like hearing my name a ton of times and that unique opportunity and privilege to have that was incredibly special. But even just total strangers just screaming their heads off, Heartbreak Hill Running Company. I don't think many people in that crowd really knew me, but like I just gave it to them and they gave it back. And it was so electric. The whole Scream Tunnel, that shot was crazy. Yeah. At mile 12, just a half a mile of Wellesley College girls screaming their heads off. Oh man, that moment, that clip, that was just a moment of pure authenticity. Like I turned to the camera and was just like, this is the best thing ever. Yeah. So, I mean, outside of times and how cool that was, the whole experience rivaled that as well. But yeah, I'm so proud of the time and my effort that day. And now that that was my 12th marathon, and I feel like I'm finally getting it. I'm understanding it. I'm understanding how to feel it. I'm understanding, wall point, 18 to 22. I know how I feel, and I know how I can continue to run, being in that pain cave and feeling that way. I've been through it enough times to know you can finish this out. Just put your head down and go.
One foot in front of the other. Yeah. I know you've got a lot of media coming out. In fact, this podcast may be out after one of your key videos because you've sort of briefed me about what's coming on the YouTube channel, which is really exciting. So I don't want to double up, with stories here, but anything more about Boston in terms of behind the scenes stuff, I think would be cool because people are seeing everything, on YouTube. They obviously saw the results. A lot of people would have been tracking you a lot. Yeah. I mean, so for reference, the people not familiar, I was running with you for the first 23 and a half-ish miles, and I can say that there would have been at least 100 people yell out Floberg on the course, potentially more, which was pretty amazing, honestly. Like I expected a lot, but it was more than what I thought.
It's overwhelming, yeah.
Yeah.
It's pretty, and even in the race, like how many fist bumps and,
Well, it occurred to me too that at one point, a lot of people were running with you just because they wanted to run with you.
Yeah.
It wasn't even really their goal pace.
Yeah.
Which is quite funny.
That was awesome. Yeah. It's so flattering. It's not lost on me. I didn't experience that until Chicago in the fall. And that's when I really was like, this is absurd. There was somebody screaming my name like every mile, and I couldn't believe it. And yeah, I knew that would be the case in Boston having the Chicago experience, but it still just leaves me dumbfounded that's happening in the races. But man, thank you so much. Like, let me publicly say thank you so much.
You already have publicly, but feel free to.
Oh man,
it's all good. I had a lot of fun,
dude. I said it at the end of my race, so I'm releasing the full breakdown video this week, and it's a full hour long, just all of my thoughts, all of the footage, as much as surrounding the race as possible. And we had the exchange at the end of the race where we finally reconnected, and I told you like I would not have run that race without your pacing and your encouragement through that. It felt like a superpower. I had never really been paced at that kind of effort of a race, and in the middle of it, I was like, oh, I get it now. I get why pacing is so special, because I was just fully turning my brain off. Like I normally super care about splits and. There's that stuff coming out, London Marathon, running to feel, that whole thing. It felt like it was the closest I've ever been to running to feel because I was just following you,
Well, you said about 2 miles in, I think I asked you if the split was okay. And you said, I'm just following you, man.
Yeah.
And that's when I realized I'm like, oh, okay, I'm actually properly in charge of the pace. That's cool. I'll do that. But I we obviously like spent the 3 hours leading into the race together, but we didn't really talk about that.
Yeah.
Strangely. But yeah, no, that's interesting. I guess, once again, don't want to double up on any stories being told on the channel, but I want to ask one specific question. When you knew, so you put the goal time out there, right? 2:35. We've already been over the fact that a 2:38 on that day is worth better than 2:35. But when you fell off the pace, what do you do mentally to get through those next 4 or 5 miles? Is it a matter of readjusting the goal, or is it just get me to the end? Is it just, what are you thinking about?
Yeah, at that point, I knew because I tried one fast mile after Newton. We summited Heartbreak, and we went that downhill mile into Boston College, and we ran that in about 6 flat. I was trying to target a 550 because I'm like, okay, if I'm going to negative split, let's see if I can. That's the only way I'll get close to the time. And so I started pressing on the gas, got to the end of that mile, and was just like, no, like it's not there. And all the small uphill rollers were killers. You know, everyone's like, oh, it's last 5 miles all downhill. No, it's not. It's net downhill.
Yeah.
You know, it's the constant refrain in marathoning. It's two main things that bother me so much. It's net downhill does not mean it's downhill. CIM is like that too. It's a silent killer. You look at the elevation profile of CIM and you're like, that's cheating. You just look at it, you're like, that's not fair. And then you run it and you're like, there's so many climbs in that race. And yeah, especially in the late miles, every 10 feet of elevation, you're just like, oh my goodness, just a small little climb is brutal. And so the other thing I was going to mention is when people talk about the heat, like we all know when we're looking at the temperatures of that day, everyone in the back of their head is like, it's going to be a rough day, but everyone is trying to stay positive. They're like, it's such a beautiful day. It's a great day to run a marathon. Oh, it won't be that bad. And you're like, yes, it will. But no one wants to be the realist and, you know, the dick in that moment. That's like, no, it's going to be rough, you know? But yeah, I mean, when I got to 21, 22, it was me putting on the blinders. I had to just completely have tunnel vision. And it was that one step in front of the other. Just drag yourself to the finish line and get the best time you can. And what I said in the breakdown video is I kept the phrase in my head that kept coming through was run within yourself. Because by the time the Haunted Mile happened, the one right after Heartbreak, I started to feel the same feeling I had in Chicago with my adductors, my groin starting to grip. And I know when I get to that point, I can only press so hard because if I go over that threshold, it's going to fully lock up and then I'm going to be walking. And so it was like, get right up to that point where you feel it start to go and then don't go any further, which is so frustrating because aerobically you might be there, but your body's just revolting against you. And so it's just that dance of like, this hurts so much. I can't wait for it to be done. I can run faster right now, but I actually can't. And so I'm trying to do math in my head, which is a lost cause at that point. There's really no way. You're like, I have no idea what my projected finish time is. I'm like, I think it's a 2:37, but I have no clue. And so, yeah, it's just a matter of like, my friend Zach, who I'd met a few weeks prior, we were kind of just neck and neck the whole last 4 miles. And he had 20 feet on me for 3 miles. And I finally overtook him in like 25. So like that was a huge psychological win. And I was like taking out a few other people like that too. So yeah, it's a bunch of different things, but mostly it's just like, just get me to the finish line. Yeah. And like, let the time be what it is. Yeah.
You couldn't describe that any better. I mean, I've been in that headspace so many times.
Yeah.
It's like, I feel like I could aerobically go faster, but the body doesn't want to. Yeah. It's very relatable. All right. Lastly, I'd like to ask a little bit more about BPN and your, the team over there, because it's been interesting to see the growth, especially into the running space. I was familiar with Nick, never met him, but, noticed his stuff early on and he got into marathons and it seems like there's a pretty big push into that space, nutrition-wise, athlete-wise. Yeah, like talk about how you first were introduced to BPN, I think would be interesting, and then what's going on with BPN that you can share.
Yeah, I had followed Nick's stuff for years. Really none of the lifting stuff, I'm not into lifting. So when he started getting into marathons, I was watching all the race videos. So he was another one of those, because he started making stuff kind of after Kofuzi and Seth were, in the early heyday of their marathon vlogs. And so once he came out with his Buffalo Marathon, he ran sub 250. I was like, oh, wow. The dude of this size running this pace is insane. And then clearly the BPN media team was like doing a phenomenal job on these films. And so there was clearly a connection there. And I don't remember exactly when I got connected to Jordan Utter, who is now creative lead at BPN. He's another one of those people. And there are a bunch of other media people on the BPN team who watched my photo video channel for years. And now they're looking at me on the team and they're like, this is really weird for me to be looking at you as an athlete now. Yeah, it's, I just didn't even realize how much BPN was turning into the endurance space until really the fall of last year, where they came out with a Go Gel. And you can't really be in the endurance space without having a gel, or stuff to fuel an actual marathon. Sure, there's other supplements that you could take throughout that are helpful, but you need fuel inside of a race. And so they came out with the Go Gel right before Chicago. I think that was right around the release. And so they were at the Chicago Expo, and I knew two people at the table. We had already exchanged on social media. Steven Southall, who's on the team now, he actually met me in the spring, that spring prior at another creative event. And he was actually the first person to say, I watch both channels. And that blew my mind. And so he got on the BPN team. And then A-Rod, who was graphic designer at the time, he just handed me a box of stuff. He's like, obviously don't try it on race day, but just give it a whirl. And so right after Chicago, I started implementing it into my build back to CIM, which wasn't a peak race or anything, and really started enjoying the product. And I was like, this is awesome. And then shortly after that, they were like, well, we've been following you for a while and watching your stuff, and we'd love for you to be on the team. And I was like, what? So yeah, that was just mind blowing. And the way they go about it, similarly, what I was talking about earlier, is like they have zero expectation on deliverables. They're like, you do you, integrate it the way you need to, and that's going to be what's most efficient here. And it's allowed me to be exactly who I am. It's allowed me to sustainably keep Cyrus as an employee and like sustain what we do. And so what's so cool about that is Nick and his philosophy on business is so similar to all the things I do and what I stand for. And the creative component of it is so apparent with BPN. Like, wearing one of the shirts right now, just like the care and concern they have for making things look and feel good and cool, and like having some sort of aesthetic or caring about the artistic side of athletics. It doesn't happen that often. And it's when it, someone like me, it makes perfect sense to be a part of something like that. And so, yeah, they were at Boston, like they were driving me around. We were in the Airbnb together. Like it was, I don't feel like I deserve that. I'm like not an elite athlete. So there's definitely that imposter syndrome happening. But when it comes to seeing people be motivated or bringing more people into the space, and like these videos and this story, allowing more people to partake and enjoy in marathoning the way we love it, it's like, okay, that's just really cool. So I don't know. That was a really long answer. But
no, perfect
answer. Yeah. I love the brand. I'm obsessed with it. Athlete Weekend was insane. Like everybody else on the team, the two things I came away with, like every athlete on the team, is that everyone was kind and everyone was intelligent. And that just said a lot about who they're wanting to bring onto the team. It's so fun to connect with people across even different sports, powerlifting through CrossFit and into endurance sport. It's just really special.
Amazing. Well, we'll round up. I know you've got to get back to it. There's a few big edits going on at the moment. But lastly, and I know, sorry, some of these questions are sort of out of order, but what's next? What's the rest of this year got in store? Are you running Chicago? Are you running CIM? Are any of these things locked in yet?
Yeah. I just texted Jeff today to see, because he texted me after race and he's like, we need to have a lengthy conversation about how we're going to get you down to low 230s, under 230, which again, I can't believe we're even having that conversation right now. I never imagined that would even be possible for me, but he seems very, very fired up. And he said things like, I have some ideas of how to get you there. I'm like, oh, that's cool to hear. He's like, I want to try some stuff, So I'm really excited, looking forward to that conversation. I have someone in my DMs right now from Berlin Track Club who's like, we can get you a bib to Berlin. And so we're just talking about if that's the case, they would want to kind of do the race sponsored with them. So I'm looking at that, and I had a brief conversation with Jeff. He's like, it's your home course, it's home turf. You don't have travel. obviously ideal. It's Chicago. It's so flat. You know it. But weather's unpredictable in Chicago. You have that. Like weather's pretty predictable all the time in Berlin, but you have to deal with all the travel things. And then if there's a collaboration as well, then I have to, worry about the content side of that too. It wouldn't be that big of a deal. Cyrus would crush it. But just the past few days, I've kind of been leaning more towards the Chicago route. Like I'm already signed up for it. I don't have to worry about it. I'm already locked in. And then I can just time qualify for Berlin next year if I want to. It almost kind of feels like that's the decision I want to make. I have a little bit more time with Chicago as well. I can run the same tune-up half marathon race I did last fall, which I loved. So it almost feels like that decision is made. And I mean, I literally know this course like the back of my hand. So that makes me feel really confident stepping into the scariest time goal yet. So I think it's not official yet, but I think it might be.
Awesome, man. Well, really appreciate your time doing the Sweat Elite podcast. Looking forward to sharing some more miles, and especially looking forward to seeing what the rest of the year holds in store for the performance.
Thank you.
So much.
Yeah.
Crazy.